Well, hi. Thanks for joining us. Special Report Online. If you haven't been here before, welcome aboard. It's a great forum. You can continue the conversation with the panel. You can type in questions or comments. Don't worry if you don't see it right away. Producers are getting them in as fast as we can. Our panel is still here, Jonah, Mara, and Tucker. So let's start where we left off with the Dalai Lama. Take another listen. Considering all the things we face around the world, are you optimistic about the world's future?
Oh yes, because you see, I know, because as I mentioned, you see, the scientists now, and many of my friends, you see, consider, you see, basic human nature is more positive. If basic human nature is more negative, then no hope. The media also have important role to educate people.
Yeah.
Media, you see, showing or telling people murder or rapes or all these negative things, then people get the impression, oh, basic human nature is more negative. So it is very important to make clear presentation about this negative thing. At the same time, also show basic sort of human nature is positive. So there is hope. These things can reduce, I think, out of 7 billion human beings. I think these troublemakers, I think, very, very minority. I always believe, whether accept religion or not, up to individual. Once we accept, we should be serious, sincere. Should not, you see, showing some nice thing, doing something different. That's, I think, a great damage about the religion.
Don't be hypocritical.
Oh, hypocritical way, including some Tibetan Lama, you see, telling practice of contentment. But the Lama themselves want more money. That's hypocrisy.
Last thing. Have you ever seen the movie Caddyshack?
What?
Caddyshack, the movie?
I don't know.
You don't know the movie?
I don't know.
The part about the Dalai Lama? Have you ever played golf?
No.
You're not a big hitter?
Then Batman.
But not golf?
No.
There's a classic movie called Caddyshack where they talk about the Dalai Lama.
I see.
I had to ask you about it.
I don't know.
Well, thank you very much for the time.
Thank you.
Very appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so just my internal thinking was I going to ask it? Was I going to get there? And I just went for it. What surprised me is that he's never been asked.
Well, I don't believe him for a second.
Come on,
all
he
respect
knows
to his holiness. If you look at his eyes, he's seen Caddyshack a million times. And he doesn't want to undermine his religious stature. But you busted him.
You know what, though? I think this was a career highlight. Absolutely. You have to send him a DVD of Caddyshack and explain that it is this huge American pop culture moment that he was part of.
Maybe send the PG version.
Oh, yeah. Don't send the
version?
Yeah,
Okay,
because
sure,
yeah. But frankly, I cannot decide until PolitiFact investigates whether or not the Dalai Lama was telling the truth when he said he's never seen it. You know,
He looks so shifty when Bret asked him. He's like, oh, no.
it could be like 4 Pinocchio's pants on fire. They have a video of him watching Caddyshack. You know.
Yes. But what are you saying about the other part of the interview? Was pretty interesting. I thought that the fact that he said the Chinese leader finally kind of praised Buddhists. The fact that he met with the president again today, China is all up in arms about it. It's just an interesting person in the world.
And he refused to get involved in the American political election,
Yes.
which the Pope did not.
That's true. Yeah. And neither, speaking, by the way, as an Episcopalian, neither is the Archbishop of Canterbury. You know, the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church. They're always weighing in on this stuff, and they devalue, I think, their moral authority by doing it, and they could learn something from the leader of Tibetan
But,
Buddhism.
you know, there's also, and one of the things I just sort of think is fascinating, someone told me, I guess when he was a little kid, you're the Pashet Lama, which is when you're selected to be the Dalai Lama or something like that. I could have that wrong. But he's got a handwritten note from FDR.
Wow.
And the thing is, when you think about it, of the lions of the 20th century, I mean, clearly he wasn't Winston Churchill, he didn't have that kind of role, but he was around, and he was the Dalai Lama when Winston Churchill was president, when, you know, throughout the entire second half of the Soviet Union, when Kennedy was president.
That is amazing.
And he's the last guy like that. Right? I can't think of another world figure who's
Castro.
sort of Castro, yeah.
Yes.
But he beats Castro by a good.
He
good
wears
bit.
it lightly too.
He does.
Yeah, Doug 1959 says it would have to be robe on fire instead. Not pants on fire.
Badminton in that robe. See, that's
badminton.
what I knew he
That's
wasn't
another-
telling the truth.
Yeah.
I bet you it's on YouTube.
Indy Farmer says, Brett, you should have asked him if he's ever said Gungala Gungala. I thought that was going too far if I went that way. And Dalai Lama fact checker gives him 3 mulligans. Okay, J.S. Johns. Okay, let's talk about the politics where we left off. Is there a sense that the Trump campaign is back in a bad spot after the judge comments and now kind of criticism post-Orlando, or somehow this is not being read by people in Washington the right way and that the country is in a different place and Trump is actually doing better? I mean, the latest polls suggest that may not be the case, but we've read it wrong before.
Everybody is against Trump, and not just, everybody in power is against Trump, and not just in the sense that they disagree with him, though I guess they do, but in the sense that they believe or they are acting as if he is personally morally indefensible, and anybody who was aligned with him in any way is not just incorrect but immoral, a bad person on Satan's team. When it I can't predict the long-term effects of that, though it's hard to see how it's good, but it's something I've never seen before in 30 years in Washington, where a position, he's the nominee of one of the 2 main parties, and it's like a sign and mark of the beast to say that you agree with him in any sense. It's really unprecedented.
Well, how about the Republican leaders who now say, I will not speak the name of Donald Trump. I
it's
won't
like
talk
Voldemort.
about him. But how can they not talk about the nominee of their party, who they have been on record saying they want to be the president?
So wait a second. You have Gary Hogan, governor of Maryland, who endorsed Chris Christie, who then, of course, endorsed Donald Trump and stood behind him famously in that where he stood behind him in that speech he gave at Mar-a-Lago.
Right.
And now Hogan says he can't not only vote for him, but he can't support him, and he's going to write somebody in.
Yeah, it's really something. Now, we would say that it's impossible to win if you have the party so divided behind you. But what I'm waiting to see is, first of all, the polls were right about Donald Trump during the primaries. We were wrong, but the polls were pretty accurate.
We dismissed the polls, but the polls, the numbers were actually right.
So now we have a small set of new polls that are barely beginning to measure the effects of the Orlando attack. What we have is the 5 weeks where he dug a hole, as someone said, nobody plays a winning hand worse than Donald Trump, where he dug himself a hole with the comments about the quote, Mexican judge, who was an American. That has clearly taken a toll on him, and you see that in the polls. Now we have this attack. Now, conventional wisdom would say that should benefit him. Paris helped him. San Bernardino helped him. This should be helping him. Traditionally, it helps Republicans. Any national security issue does. But we don't know yet.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's where my instincts would go, is to say this is, it's a tragedy, but he benefited from the Paris attack. He benefited from San Bernardino, and he'll probably benefit from this. On the other hand, there is an argument that you hear from Democrats that the more crazy and chaotic society seems and that problems seem, that someone as mercurial as Donald Trump it becomes scarier, and that's what Hillary Clinton's plan is. She is the calm, school marm.
She's trying to out-calm him at every turn.
That's
also
right.
Make a whole case about his temperament. Look what happened in the financial crisis. John McCain seemed like he was flying off the handle a little bit, and Barack Obama was Mr. Zen, calm, cool, and collected. She's making a temperament case, and she's using the crucial month of June, which the Democrats really believe is the time they have to define someone, like they did Mitt Romney, and as somebody said, pre-cook him, and that's what they're trying to do.
But she is vulnerable.
Oh, she's super vulnerable. That's one of the reasons they have to do this.
That is the great irony, is that both parties have nominated the one person that the other party has a chance of beating. Hillary Clinton, I think, is an incredibly weak, flawed candidate. I think Trump is an incredibly weak, flawed candidate. But they both have vulnerabilities that the other can exploit. I do think, though, the polling, to me, the polling is interesting in that Donald Trump, first of all, this should have been his golden moment while she was still battering Sanders. But he is underperforming among non-college whites compared to Mitt Romney.
That is an incredible fact.
If he cannot, he is supposed to be running away with that demographic. And he's underperforming with whites generally compared to previous Republican nominees. And if that holds, when you have 89% disapproval among Hispanics and what is it, 76% disapproval among women, and I think he's at 50% even among white men. At some point, you have to ask the question: do the sort of fair weather, sort of hackish establishment, rank and file Republicans who make up most of the delegates just get a flop sweat panic about the poll number?
I don't think they can do that.
Let me, Alan in Maryland says if this election is about jobs, Trump will win. And then, let's see.
I think that's true if he can actually stay on message. When have we seen him do it for more than 48 hours?
There's a foreign policy argument to be made against Obama and Clinton. There's a jobs argument to be made.
Sure.
He's not making it.
But I have to say, but how sad is it, though, that the core question is being ignored? I mean, the lesson of Orlando is your immigration, one of them is your immigration policy has consequences.
Or your national security policy has failed.
But the two are related. So what exactly is the answer to what's happened in, for example, Sweden, which has been totally destroyed, actually, as a country, by a massive unassimilated group of immigrants from the Middle East? How is it going to be different here? I haven't heard any of the people wagging their fingers at Trump, calling him a racist.
We don't have the kind of immigration here from the Middle East that Trump does.
But we don't. But if it were up to Hillary Clinton and, frankly, some of the Republican leadership, we would have massive numbers of people. Yes, we would. The president himself said he'd like to import over 100,000 refugees from Syria. We have moved. Minneapolis has been totally transformed by Somali refugees. My only point is
100,000 in a country this size. Germany is taking 1 million Syrians.
I'm merely saying, if your immigration policy is to allow anyone who wants to move here, legally or illegally, and that is Hillary Clinton's stated position, in effect, what is to prevent America from having experiences similar to those
well, that's
watching
the Trump
Western
argument.
No, but he's not making that argument, unfortunately, because he's not good at making any argument. But what is the actual answer? How do you prevent that? So nobody has a plan.
Dudlett 101 asks, what can Trump do to stop the friendly fire from other Republicans? And, listen, when you talk to a lot of Republicans, they say, stay on script, don't step on the message, make it through one day, that you are together. He shoots a lot of different bullets through the day, rhetorically, and sometimes it really misses.
Look at the terrible job numbers. Was it last week? Right?
Yeah, and he was.
If this was a disciplined campaign, we would still be talking about the lousy job numbers.
Yeah, he was talking about the judge.
At least until we got into
but he was
the
asked
Orlando
about
shooting.
the judge. I mean, the media is asking about the judge.
But then he went on and on.
And he doubled down on it?
No, he first talked about the judge in that speech. It was a speech at a rally. Here we are in San Diego. Happens to be where I have this case.
But here's what they say. Here's what they say. He's not a normal politician. He's not a politician who is refined. This is he's raw.
He is raw.
Yes,
that's what they like about him.
But the promise of a Trump candidacy would be he sets the terms of the debate, and at his best he does. He says, this is what I want to talk about, and yet he's allowed the press and his opponents to define the terms. What I don't think, though, friendly fire is an entirely accurate description of what he's getting from some. Paul Ryan, for example, who I believe probably wants to run for president in 2020. He's actively working against the Trump campaign and, in effect, for the Hillary effort. I'm just struck. You don't have to agree with what Trump says. You can be appalled by what he says. I'm in that category a lot of the time. But in the end, especially if you're a politician, an office holder, it's a choice between two people.
That's why he
So
endorsed it.
why aren't Republican leaders pointing to Hillary and saying, what exactly is your plan to keep large numbers of Muslim immigrants from becoming radicalized? They never even ask her the question. It's like somehow immoral to bring it up, and yet it's an absolutely real question. Why is that? Why don't they ever say that?
I think if Donald Trump were a disciplined candidate, right? You can still talk about these issues, and I'm very sympathetic to some of your arguments about the policy issues that Donald Trump is not thoughtfully articulating.
He's not, that's for sure.
But you can't have someone like Paul Ryan, who I think is a man of integrity, right, and has some core principles. You can't ask him to go out and endorse the nominee, defend the nominee, and then within 24 hours essentially humiliate him by saying things that Paul Ryan has been arguing against for 30 years. And so the upshot of what you're talking about is essentially saying that party loyalty should trump everything else.
That's the opposite of the argument I'm making. I'm making the argument that if Paul Ryan does indeed believe in these things, and we give him a lot of credit for being a man of principle and a deep intellectual, a lot of credit, I think he ought to look at both those candidates and say, I disagree with Trump, of course, I have to endorse him. I'm the Speaker of the House.
Sure.
But Hillary Clinton is making some appalling arguments that violate my principles to an even greater degree than Trump does. Why not mention it once in a while? And yet he doesn't.
That's fair. Well, I actually, in fact, don't
I'm
know
against
that
mindless party loyalty, trust me.
Dave, let me interrupt. Dave Levine writes that the rawness was good in the primaries, not so good now.
Right. Well,
Not good.
Well, Trump doesn't see a difference between his strategy and demeanor in the primary and the general. As a matter of fact, it worked for him great. Why shouldn't he continue?
He thinks they're both the same electorate.
Yes, today he said to Republican leaders, you should be quiet, you should toughen up, meaning get behind me, or be quiet, and I can win without you. And that's what he thinks. Now, the implications of that for the Republican Party, we'd have to really scratch our heads and think that one through. But you've got someone who is now not beholden to any party structure. He doesn't even believe in having a ground campaign.
But you change when you get married. It's different from wooing.
Well, he doesn't believe that.
Right? And if you didn't, I think your wife would be unimpressed. Right?
JC writes, anti-Trump Bret Baier doesn't disappoint. Lead question to the panel is Trump's problem with NRA, not Obama's failures, Hillary's flip-flops. It's not anti-Trump to point out that he is talking about making a negotiation on something that has been a sticking point, and the NRA has said they're not moving from.
But how can Republicans support? I mean, look, if you think the federal government ought to be able to, without telling you, strip you of a basic fundamental right, number 2 in the Bill of Rights, by the way, the right to bear arms, just because they...
Number 2 with a bullet.
Yeah, because they deem you dangerous, again, not even telling you, then what's to keep them from deciding, I know, Jonah, your views over the AI are a threat to this country. You're an enemy of the state. We're going to strip you of your right to bear arms.
But is there not some middle ground?
There has to be.
Which would be where? I mean,
which would be there's some escape valve for somebody who can appeal the process of being on the list or being on the no-fly list, and thereby...
Well, what's wrong with the system we've had for 200 years?
Because somebody's going to... Well, because they say that it still allows a terrorist who's being investigated by the FBI to get access to guns.
Yeah, there's one point, though. In the clip you played of Hillary during the broadcast show, she said none of these things that Donald Trump is proposing would have prevented the Orlando shooting. And she said the wall wouldn't have done it, blah, blah, blah. I don't know how a wall will stop the internet. It's cute. She's also the one who said that her server was secure because it was protected by armed Secret Service agents.
Did she say that?
Yes.
She did say that.
And
that's hilarious.
But the point is, what they're proposing wouldn't have stopped it either, right? I mean,
this guy bought the guns legally.
The guy had, and people talk about the need for background checks. This guy was investigated twice by the FBI. There was no system of background checks that would be nearly as onerous as that.
And they concluded the coworkers who had complained about him were racist.
Yeah,
that's what they concluded.
It's insane.
Right. You know what would stop it, though, is preventing people who might potentially hate this country and act against it to move here.
Although he's not an immigrant.
If there's a crime problem in your neighborhood, what's the first thing? His parents weren't. They were moved here. And what's the first thing you do if there's a crime problem in your neighborhood? Is it call the police, start shooting people? No, it's lock your doors. That's the first step in protecting yourself, is to secure your physical space. Why is it the last thing? Why is it considered verboten to mention that? I don't understand that.
All right, some people are typing in. Hillary Clinton said if you are under investigation by the FBI, you should not be able to buy a gun. We think if you're under investigation by the FBI, you should not be able to run for president. Interesting comment.
I think that's exactly right.
Entirely fair. The subject of a criminal investigation with the FBI, and yet you're allowed to run for president? You should be on some kind of list.
And also, a watch list.
A watch list.
The reason that she's investigated...
She's still flying, by the way. She's on airplanes every day.
But the reason why she's being investigated is because she basically gave a back door to all sorts of countries, including state sponsors of terror, to her server. I mean, it's a perfectly legitimate point. I think Trump would do much better focusing on those kinds of attacks.
This is why we say, nobody plays a winning hand worse than Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So,
he plays a losing hand very well.
Is that going to change?
Yes, he plays a losing hand very well.
Yeah. How many weeks do we have before the convention? It's July 18th.
About a month.
Yeah.
About a month.
So is it going to change before Cleveland?
Well, it hasn't changed yet, and he talked about that presidential pivot many, many times, and it didn't happen. I think we should...
Because he can't
declare it not.
Man, he could win this issue. What percentage of Americans want more immigration from the Middle East to the United States? Like, it's a minority, for sure. And if you, in a calm way, said this isn't racist, it's not bigoted, this is a matter of self-protection. Look at what happened to Europe. We need to figure out a way to do this differently and to assimilate people who move here to keep them from hurting us. If you made that case in a calm way, you would win everybody but the New York Times editorial page.
Oh my gosh! By the way, that was really something. That editorial.
What I didn't say in my little rant about it is that it tracked perfectly with what Barack Obama said in his first statement.
That's right.
About the Orlando shooting, where he says we have to learn we have to look into ourselves and learn to be better people and more tolerant and all that. That is not the lesson of a crazy guy going in. Or as an Islamic terrorist going in and shooting up a club, gay club or otherwise. And it's really
it reveals their
irresponsible.
worldview, which is they think the real threat is overweight white guys in the Midwest who listen to country music. I mean, that's where the real danger lies. That's what they think.
And that's one of the reasons why I'm against the terror watch list, because every time...
How long before you're on it?
Every time the Islamic terrorism stuff calms down, Jay Johnson or somebody else from the administration starts talking about how the real threat is from homegrown right-wing terrorists. And
this was homegrown Islamic terrorism.
Yeah, but what they're talking about, you have these reports that come out of DHS about soldiers returning from the war becoming radicalized white supremacists, Tim McVeigh types. They're much more comfortable talking about that threat. And I could see, if you just gave the Center for... I can't remember the guys who always label everything hate crimes, including probably
Southern Poverty
Law Center. If you get someone from in there starting to decide who counts as a terrorist, and it will metastasize. And already there are hundreds of thousands of people in this terror.
Last thing here is you have Julian Assange out there saying that they have access to Hillary Clinton's emails, and one would assume that. Some other state actor may have hacked into some of these emails, if you believe this Guccifer that he got in there. Yet the focus on that whole investigation and what's going to happen and the possibilities, it's not even...
Well, Gawker published the DNC hacked emails. If somebody has access to her emails, they should publish them and prove that, because that, I think, would be a huge thing.
Particularly if it's some of the 30,000 ones that were deleted.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, who wants to read all that stuff about yoga?
It's all about yoga.
Yeah.
She does a ton of
wedding
yoga.
plans, everything else. But that's still hanging there.
Yeah.
I mean, does anybody on this panel think that that's going to resolve itself? Either...
No, because what does that have to do with Trump? I mean, this is a contest between good and evil, and we know this. Trump is evil. Anyone who opposes him is good. I mean, the press really has taken sides in this, and this is not an endorsement of Trump. I think he's run a bad campaign for the past month. But it's just true. I read 5 papers every day. I've never seen coverage like this in my life. They hate him, they think he's immoral, and they don't think it's too far to just take sides. In the news coverage, does anyone else read the papers? You notice this?
Yeah, well, listen, I think it's... we stand with the Washington Post to get their credentials back. They stood with us when we were getting kind of exit out of the press pool in the White House for a number of things. But that said, some of these headlines have been amazing to see news stories that are headlines that Trump says Obama complicit or Obama
had something to do with it, as opposed to sympathizing. Yeah.
But at the same time, the problem there, and I agree, the initial Washington Post headline was terrible, and
which they changed.
Which they changed, and they should have changed it. At the same time, you have a guy who explicitly said that an opponent's father was in on the Kennedy assassination. Yeah. You have a guy who repeatedly does these innuendo kind of things, says outrageous stuff, and then you're shocked that people take the most outrageous interpretation of something ambiguous that he says. It's kind of nuts. And so there are a lot of journalists out there who have simply just assumed that the worst interpretation possible of what Trump says is the most accurate one. And then when he tries to defend himself, he often gets his hackles up and says, that's exactly what I meant.
Right?
Look, I disagree. This isn't Trump being filtered through the media. Trump has had the most unfiltered access of any politician in American history. It's his own words and statements that
I know, but Mara, there's not one journalist who's voting for Donald Trump. There's not one. Not literally. I've spent this is my 25th year in this. All I know are journalists. I don't know one who's voting for him. Everybody is voting for Hillary, and that affects the coverage. And I'm not defending Trump's lunacy or his imprecision with language, which drives me crazy personally because it discredits views I agree with. There are a lot of things about Trump that I would never defend. But the press coverage, they're not even trying. They're just like, you're bad, we hate you.
Cat Automation Alley, Michigan. Isn't Trump like every other politician, but without the lying?
Well,
like he has no filter, is what you're saying, I guess.
Yeah, and you mean because he changes his views, like on guns or
I think she's saying that
American?
he has no filter and he's not sugarcoating his answers.
I
in
don't
any
know
way,
if the
shape, or
only
form.
difference between him and other politicians is that he doesn't have a filter. And they
There are
do.
many differences.
I think there are many more
There's a
differences.
long list.
Yeah.
All right, so day to day, we'll see. We will see. But I say one thing: inner peace.
Gunga.
Inner peace.
So you got that going for you.
So I got that going for me.
You got to send him a copy of Caddyshack.
The PG version.
Yeah.
Yes, the PG version.
Gungula, gungula. Eternal consciousness on your death. So I got that going. Okay.
All right.
I'm off on summer vacation, so I'll be out next week. But then the week after, I'll be back. Shannon and Chris will take care of you. Control room, live goodbye. Panel, thank you.